What's up, sons? It's Blindguard with Son of a Tech once again, coming at you with yet another mining video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the EVGA RTX 3090 for the Win 3 Ultra Gaming Edition and its Ethereum hash rates. We'll also compare that and see how it stacks up against the rest of the competition, at least the competition that I have personally been able to test with our now solid, of course, power to hash rate ratio charts that we have been doing, and hopefully you'll find this video helpful. If not now, because video cards are hard to come by, at least in the future if you are looking down the line. Later on, we'll follow this up with its gaming performance, and then of course we will be checking out other algorithms and coins to mine on it and see if it can basically be profitable on something other than Ethereum, with of course the worry of proof of stake coming up on Ethereum. But without further ado, let's talk about the specifications. It has 10,496 CUDA cores with an 1800 megahertz boost clock, which should basically not affect mining, at least Ethereum, very much at all. That being said, here's the good parts, right? Memory, we have 24 gigabytes of memory on a 384-bit bus, and the effective speed is 19,500 megahertz with 936 gigabits per second of memory bandwidth. The cooling is the ICX3 technology, so it's going to be a triple fan cooler design, and it is actually smaller than my RTX 3080 gigabyte master card, which is pretty funny, and it has the ARGB logo that you can fully control in software and of course turn off. I haven't been able to get it to turn off in Hive OS though, but in Windows it's no problem getting it to turn off. It is PCIe 4.0. For mining, this isn't going to be relevant. For gaming and maybe future coins and so on, it may become relevant, but at this time for mining, the PCIe 4.0 will go ahead and retroactively work with PCIe 3.0 and 2.0, so on. So don't worry about it. You're going to be able to still mine and get the full mining performance regardless of what risers and motherboard you're using, depending on, of course, other factors that may play into that. And of course, future. We don't know about the future yet, but when we do know, we'll let you guys, we'll let you know. All right, so we have a minimum of a 750 watt power supply required. They recommend if you are on an i5, i7, Ryzen 5, or Ryzen 7 that you run an 850 watt power supply. And if you are on Ryzen 9 or Threadripper, of course, or the equivalent on Intel with their server grade chips that require more power, you are going to want a 1000 watt power supply. It is very power hungry, and you will see that when we get into the testing. It requires 3 8-pin PCIe power adapters, so not just 2. You will have to get all 3 plugged in there, especially for mining. And I would recommend not using any splitters, anything of the sort, because of the amount of power it is drawing. Also, if you're going to be mining with this in a farm and using a PCIe riser, make sure that you are using a 6-pin PCIe powered riser, and do not use any sort of SATA extensions, as you will be pulling too much power through that SATA power adapter and you'll burn it up. So be very careful if you're planning on building a mining rig with this. Plan on sufficient power options. You can check out Parallel Miner down in, of course, the description below. Use my affiliate link to pick up some server grade power supplies with breakout boards. We've covered this in the past, and right now that's going to be the most cost effective way to get all of those 8-pin and 6-pin PCIe power adapters that are going to be required, of course, for this particular GPU. Now, it says that its total power draw is 350 watts, and that is pretty accurate. You'll see here. Without further ado, let's hop in to the miner. What we got here is we have EVGA Precision X1 up, and then we have Phoenix Miner 5.4C here, and then we have LOL Miner 1.18 or A over here. So we have a couple different ones that we can test out. And here is the overclocking. Right now it is at stock. So we don't have any overclock on the GPU core. We don't have any overclock. Well, it does look like we do have the power down to 80 because we were running it at 80. So we'll put that at 100% power there and get rocking. So memory overclock is 0, and we will go to everybody's favorite miner first, which is going to be Phoenix Miner, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about what we find here. So let's check the kilowatt first. On the kilowatt here, we're at 130 watts, just as we've always been, right around 130 watts. And we will go ahead and start the Phoenix Miner. As you can see, the memory clock is at 9,502, and we do have to point something out there in just a tad as well. Our hash rate out of the box is going to be around 100 mega hash a second with no changes, with the memory clocked at 9,502 and the core clock bouncing around all over the place, which seems to be true in gaming as well, and we'll talk about that in the gaming review because it's kind of problematic. It's interesting. We'll have to see what happens in the future with firmware updates, etc. So the fan curve does apply properly, luckily, with the auto. As you can see, we are up to 47%, which is about 1,430 rotations per minute, and that is going to result in a temperature of about 66 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, we do not have the capability of reading the memory modules on this particular GPU. There is not software that has read that for me, unfortunately. So about 104 mega hash a second, that seems to be where we settle in with stock. Now, let's take a look at power. So on the kilowatt now, we are at 460 watts. So if we subtract the 130 from the system before running it, that is going to put us at about 330 watts, which can also be confirmed in hardware info, as well as on the screen in Phoenix Miner right here, where it's recording 334 watts. So good news, the Phoenix Miner is recording the wattage correctly, at least compared to the kilowatt. So that's fantastic. Let's go ahead and talk about the overclock. So for this overclock, you can go down to about 80% power, but even still, unfortunately, that doesn't actually change our power consumption. So take a look here, and we are still right at 460 watts. So unfortunately, for whatever reason, the power targets are not applying properly. And this is also true in MSI Afterburner. So whatever is going on with the firmware, we're not actually able to apply any power, which is very odd. But you need to keep that in mind, because we will also need to check this in Linux and see if we can get it to go down. But something's up with the drivers as far as I can tell, and that's just the way it's going to be. I will update you guys when we get that resolved. Upping the memory clock will work, however, and here's what I'm seeing. So if we go up to 1200 megahertz, that is about the cap. So, well, and in this case, we also have to talk about this. So in MSI Afterburner pre-BIOS flash. So story time, this is important. So we're testing live on YouTube yesterday, and we decided to go ahead and download Precision. And this was because we wanted to see if we could get any voltage control, which of course Precision does have some voltage control, albeit doesn't seem to be working either, unfortunately. It has the slider, you can move the slider, doesn't appear to affect the actual voltage, unfortunately. So when we download EVGA Precision, previous to that, the memory clock was showing the 9,750. When we download EVGA Precision, two things happened. First of all, it required a reboot and started rebooting automatically. And at the very same time, started flashing the firmware. Be very careful And make sure you pay attention and cancel that auto restart, because otherwise you could brick your card. It scared the ever-living crap out of me. And then after the firmware update, which is basically just a BIOS update for the GPU from EVGA, because using their software, they detected it was their GPU and flashed it because it needed to be updated. The memory clock dropped from 9,750 to 9,500. This was curious to me. Obviously, we talked about the specs in the beginning of the video, and I'm still a little confused. I've emailed EVGA to ask and inquire about this, but what that means is that the 1200 megahertz overclock on the old BIOS isn't the 1200 megahertz overclock or the same speed on the new BIOS, but going above 1200 even on this particular card does not increase hash rate significantly. So if we take this from 1200 to 1500 and then apply, we can note the changes here at 11,002, and we don't seem to see much of a change. We still sit between 118 mega hash a second and 120 mega hash a second, maybe a little bit more solidly at 119 mega hash a second or 120 with this, but there are some concerns here. If the memory overclock was turned down from a BIOS flash on this card, then it's safe to assume something is going on with the memory modules on the card. I don't see any other reason why you would decrease the stock memory clock unless there was an issue. So I'm very concerned about this, and I have emailed EVGA. In addition to that, I have noticed the same problems on the RTX 3080 and 3070 with memory modules not performing at the overclocks after a couple weeks of mining. So if you're mining 24/7 on an RTX 3000 series card, you may want to just back off those memory overclocks until we get an answer on why EVGA is downclocking them with a firmware update, number one. And number two, I have noticed that on the 3080, for example, I had it running at plus 1200, which was putting us, closer to 100 mega hash a second on that particular card. And after a week, it just stopped mining, right? And so I turned off the memory overclock. It started mining again, started mining okay, did some testing, bumped it up to 800 megahertz, then 900 at 900 megahertz overclock. The 3080 failed. My 3080 will now not go over 800 megahertz on the memory overclock without crashes and reboots. So for me personally, on a $1,800 USD GPU, I am not feeling like running this memory overclock personally. We have calculated the numbers in this manner in the chart. However, I'm going to suggest that for now, until we get an answer, you do not overclock the memory. So right now I am just leaving mine at 0 and taking the loss of the 20 mega hash at this point, unfortunately. So let's talk numbers. All right, so we are going to throw up the Ethereum power hash rate chart here, and I will explain the chart first and then we'll talk about the numbers. When you're taking a look at this chart, obviously the higher the power draw, the higher the orange line is, and the higher the hash rate, the higher the blue line is. Your goal here when looking at this chart is to find the points at which the GPU is closest to each other, or the power is closest to the hash rate. So if you go over this chart, for example, at 56 mega hash a second at 95 watts, the RX 5700s and 5700 XTs look very enticing. They're very close together. I don't currently have an RTX 3060 Ti, so I can't make any statements as far as that particular card, but right now, out of all the cards I've tested, the RX 57 is still showing to be a beast. That being said, going down the line, of course, the RTX 3080 holds its own at 180 watts with 87 mega hash. That is what I'm going to be reporting on because that is now what that card mines at. And I am aware that some cards, right out of the box will do 100 mega hash a second. Is it safe to run it at that? In my opinion, no. I've had issues with that. The RTX 3070 is, competitive at 63 mega hash a second with 125 watts, but you're still going to be better served by a 5700 in this particular case. And then moving all the way up and giving the RTX 3090 every single advantage that we possibly can. It's 120 mega hash at 323 watts with an obvious issue of the power not applying, right? So because we can't apply a power downscale or turn that down at all right now, it's going to be higher. And until a driver fixes it, which we tried multiple drivers, and we have not tried we haven't tried multiple operating systems yet, and we'll have to get onto that. But at this current time, it is not as profitable as almost any other card option that you have on this chart that I have tested, and that includes the RX 5500 XT. If you're looking for density though, it is a good option, of course, still. And even still with these hash rates, you'll pay it off in under a year, which is wild if you can get your hands on one for retail. And then the last point that I was going to bring up that people seem to miss is that it's not always just about power to hash rate. You also need to take into account resaleability and depreciation. So when you're mining, you have the ability on your taxes, depending on your country, of course, and get with your CPA and talk to a tax attorney so they can help you determine what these numbers are. But you do get to file for depreciation of GPUs. So the more expensive the GPU, in theory, right, the more depreciation will be accrued, there we go, and then you will be able to write that off. So there is that to keep in mind, as well as an RTX 3090 is going to sell a lot better on the used market when ETH is done being profitable, right? Or just on proof of stake. So that pretty much covers up the entire review of the RTX 3090 as it stands right now for the Ethereum hash rate. I did get some gaming done on it. Look for the video on that. Make sure you hit the subscribe, the bell button, and the like so it shows up in your feed. And of course, check out my affiliate link down in the description, and hopefully at some point they will be available for you to purchase on Amazon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next Tuesday.